Awesome. I can see some of our attendees starting to trickle in. So I just want to say thank you and welcome. Thanks again for joining our third session of the day. Going to be another great conversation with three fantastic panelists. So thanks again for joining. I'll give it one more minute for those numbers to jump on up, and then we'll go ahead and start with our presentation. So thanks for joining us. Hi, if you just on, I'm just going to give it one more minute and then we'll go ahead and kick off today's session. So I appreciate everyone for jumping on. A lot of familiar names that have been joining us all day, so hopefully to grab some food. Enjoyed our first two sessions. We definitely have another great panel throughout the day, so we're really excited to get started. Cool. Well, in the interest of giving our panelists time for conversation, go ahead and kick this off. I just want to say thanks again for everyone joining again. This is our third session of the day, thinking beyond green in our built environment. We've had a lot of engaging and really a broad stroke of conversation today. So I'm excited to kind of close out today and bring it back to built environment, but again, continuing the conversation and how the built environment and the industries that we may work in heavily intersect with equity and keeping that intersectional lens with our work that we continue to do and continue to learn about as well. So we're just really happy with the response we've gotten from the community today, and we hope that we can, this is the first of kind of many events and many conversations that we're going to have publicly. This is work that we continue to do as an organization and conversations we continue to have and challenge ourselves. So we're really thankful for the support of the community and for the amazing speakers that have given their time today. And since this is the last session, again, if you were in some of the earlier sessions, I just want to take the time again to acknowledge that I'm currently in San Diego, and I am seated on the traditional and unceded land territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. And they continue their struggle to protect our environment and sacred and ancestral lands, specifically here in San Diego along the border as well, as they continue to fight against construction, border wall construction on their ancestral homelands. So it's important to reflect on those things as we continue these conversations around development and environmental stewardship, to recognize the Indigenous peoples around the world that are at the forefront of that work. And then just as a refresher, if this is a session that you've joined today, the San Diego Green Building Council is hosting this. We are a local nonprofit really dedicated to delivering education, a broad array of sustainability and green building education to the green building or to the San Diego community. And you can learn more about us on our website there. And then again, this is the last session of the day. I have mentioned earlier, but if this is the first time joining, we have been recording all of these sessions. So we're going to make sure that this information is accessible on our website after the fact. So I will give a notification to all attendees when that information is available. And you can go back and revisit the sessions, learn more about how to get involved. If you'd like to go back and find someone's contact info, some of the panelists are giving really great calls to action and ways to get involved. So it's great to kind of review what you've learned and also share it with other community members as well. And so I just want to give our panelists a chance to take a minute to introduce themselves. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to our first panelist, Kelly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Baker. I am the Just Manager at ILFI, the International Living Future Institute. I'm so excited to just be here and to be talking about equity. It means so much to me. And so, yeah, I'm just super excited for this conversation and to hear, and learn from everyone on this call.
Thank you, Kelly. Next, we have Teva.
Hi, my name is Teva Needleman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Operations and Programs Coordinator for EcoDistricts. I'm so honored to get to be a part of this, and I'm really grateful to Bridget and San Diego Green Building Council for putting this on, and I'm excited to learn from my fellow panelists too. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And then Rose.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, all. My name is Rose Weiner. I'm the Community Concept Lead on the Standard Development Team at the International Well Building Institute, which is the organization behind the Well Building Standard. And just to echo what my fellow panelists said, I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today, to listen and learn and just have a great discussion with you all about the intersections of health, equity, and sustainability in the built environment. So thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. And then I forgot to also mention that if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A box. We'll have some time at the end to ask questions to our presenters and really foster a bit more of conversation around these subjects. So feel free to drop some questions in there as they come up. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kelly.
Thank you so much, Bridget. So hello again. I just wanted to introduce everyone to ILFI a little bit. So here at ILFI, we are a nonprofit working to build an ecologically minded restorative world for all people. And we utilize principles of social and environmental justice within all of our programs and seek to counter climate change by pushing for an urban environment free of fossil fuels within everything that we do. So this kind of just leads us into our mission, which is to catalyze the transformation towards communities that are socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. So this is just a cohesive picture of all of our programs. And this image is structured to showcase the foundation of transparency within our work. So at the foundation, here are transparency labels: declare, just, and reveal. So declare is about product transparency, just is about social equity transparency in the workplace, and then reveal is about energy transparency. And then we go into the middle line of this kind of structure, which is our certifications, and then the periphery is our cutting edge challenges and frameworks. So I wanted to also introduce you to JUST, which is so near and dear to my heart, as I think that it has such catalyzing potential, especially within the field of sustainability in the built environment. So just as a transparency platform for organizations to disclose their operations, including how they treat employees and where they make financial and community investments. So it's really meant for us to ask those questions of, does our organization or our group, represent diversity at the same diversity that's present within our locations? Are we thinking about local stakeholders and engaging them? Have we thought about gentrification? Also tying into, are we treating our employees fairly? Do they have everything that they need to, put forth their best effort in the world? We're all trying to create some sort of positive impact, and everyone needs to be supported in this. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about our goals in the JUST program. So one is to elevate the discussion around social justice concerns in all organizations, to create common language and measurement framework for social justice issues, to elevate those individuals and activists who lead on these issues, as well as to improve the HR practices and policies of thousands of organizations worldwide, and to make life better for workers from all walks of life. And so I just wanted to give you a visual representation of what our JUST label looks like. So here it is. We analyzed 22 different social equity indicators within 6 categories, being diversity and inclusion, equity, employee health, employee benefits, stewardship, and purchasing and supply chain. So those four little bubbles or boxes are our levels, and level 1 is blanket transparency. So making sure policies and documentations are open to the public to know what your organization stands for within that indicator. And then level 2 being better, level 3 is good, and then level 4 is best practices. So social equity transparency is extremely important internally and externally within organizations. And this label is meant to start conversations about social justice within organizations. But these conversations don't have to be limited to our organizations, but have us reflect on social equity around us and shed light on what questions haven't been asked or addressed within our organizations or communities. So the importance of equity in the built environment, extremely important. The built environment reaches everyone from our homes to our schools to places that we hold near and dear to ourselves. And the built environment should be representative of all people in an equitable fashion, but unfortunately it is not. So this is why the learnings of systems of oppression perpetuated within the built environment is extremely necessary in our efforts to create sustainable solutions. So I have this video that I would love to present to you all. It's by NPR, and it just kind of scratches the surface on some of these injustices as well as systems of oppression within the built environment. So I kind of want everyone to reflect, get out your pen and paper, your mental log or digital, and reflect how does what you're about to see make you feel. Also think about what did you know coming into this, what didn't you know, and then think about people in your life, coworkers, bosses, organizations, community, family. What would they know about this and what wouldn't they know? And how can you start? So following that video, I just wanted to state that we really need to start having these conversations about equity to make sure that there is intentionality behind our work to address possible blind spots that lead to a lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion within sustainability and the built environment. So we need to bring voices of traditionally underrepresented people into these conversations to share their solutions to these issues that they're continuously living through. So there are solutions, especially that these groups of people have had for years that have gone unnoticed or even silenced. So we definitely need to elevate that in all of the great work that we do. So I also urge everyone to have these conversations personally with others that may not share your same identities, whichever they may be, so that we can raise awareness on issues such as environmental classism, redlining, and environmental racism to promote the need for social justice to be a foundation within sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. It's a really great video. And I will have some questions towards the end that we can come back to about some of those topics. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Teva from EcoDistricts.
Hello, all. My name is Teva, like Bridget just said, and I'm here to talk about EcoDistricts. You can go to the next slide. So to get started, before I even begin my talk, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge the land that I'm currently on. I currently occupy what is now known as Portland, Oregon. And I think it's important that we take a moment to recognize that Portland occupies the traditional and unceded ancestral lands of the Cowlitz, Clackamas, and Kalapuya peoples. These are cultures and peoples that are still here. They're still being colonized, and they still continue to honor and bring light to their ancient heritage. I also think that since we're all tangentially related to the urban planning field, it's important that we recognize the Black and brown bodies that have been exploited to create the communities that we all occupy. As individuals and industry leaders, we need to recognize that urban development plays a major role in upholding race-based discrimination and providing a structure for white supremacy. This is not an issue of the past. Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are still being forced to help build and maintain a system that is intentionally designed to exclude and oppress them. It's also not enough to just acknowledge it. I think that we all need to work to really dismantle and like unsettle our mindsets and dismantle the internal and external structures of bigotry and like cultivate a more positive environment that actually is inclusive to all humans. So with that being said, I can now talk about EcoDistricts. So EcoDistricts is a nonprofit that focuses on equity, resilience, and climate protection in the urban planning and community development process. Our goal is to just create really rad neighborhoods that are just, resilient, and sustainable. Next slide. We do this work through two main pieces of literature, but our main one is the protocol, which is a free and downloadable piece of documentation that basically provides a lens that you can apply to projects or programs to help ensure that equity, resilience, and climate protection are at the core. If this is something that really intrigues you and your community, you can then go through the certification process. And to do that, you can use our certification handbook that really helps you map out how to go about doing it. Next slide. So a little bit of a deeper dive into what the protocol is. It is not intended to be a prescriptive method, but instead it's more of a lens to look through as you go about forming some sort of project, whether it be a neighborhood or a specific program in a neighborhood. We have three imperatives, which are equity, resilience, and climate protection. Those need to be at the core of all of the work that you do. And then we have 6 priorities areas: place, prosperity, health and well-being, connectivity, living infrastructure, and resource regeneration. And these are the 6 priorities we've identified that if you create equitable, resilient, sustainable place, prosperity, all of those, then you will have a neighborhood that genuinely functions for the people, hopefully by the people. And then all of this sounds incredible to your neighborhood and you want to actually pursue formal certification, we have an implementation phase, which starts with formation, and that creates a collective governance structure with the different neighborhood associations and different nonprofits that all represent genuine community voice, and those partner with the developers that come in so that they're not just developing and creating a space that then displaces the community, but actually has the community voice at the front and center. Once that governance structure has been created, you then create a roadmap, which is a 2-year process of really diving in and coming up with a plan, setting metrics for how it will actually be successful, so that you can make sure that the projects that you're doing aren't just claiming to do things, but actually measuring that they are successful, and the community gets to determine what that success is. And then performance is every 2 years you check in with us to make sure that you are actually hitting the targets, or maybe it's changed because sometimes the world changes like we saw this year and things don't necessarily go according to what you had planned, but you're still on a path to achieving success. Next slide. So we have 6 main principles that sort of guide the work through EcoDistricts. Number 1 is to make collaboration inescapable. That is really the key of our work. Collaboration is everything, making sure that we're actually listening. It's not just providing the space to have us have your voice heard, but actually listening to the voices and then implementing the changes that people express. There can be as many listening sessions as you can, but if you're not taking what you're hearing and actually implementing it, that's not necessarily going to provide the space that the community wants. Next slide. Then building equity into every decision. So very similarly to that, making sure that there's not just one seat at the table, but potentially a whole new table that is created with everyone at it already, so that there is an ownership of a table that you're bringing people into, but actually creating a table together and making sure that it is community run, and that if there are youth that are super passionate about it, they have as much of a say as the developer, making sure that all of the voices actually have an effective seat. Next. So making sure that we plan for climate change is becoming ever more present as we start to actually feel the impacts of climate change. The climate has changed at this point. We are feeling the impacts today. I don't know about everyone. I know that I'm from San Diego originally, and I know that wildfires have always been a thing, but I now live in Portland, and this year we had AQI in the 500s, which has never happened before. And that is something that we have to not only think about planning for, but actually start planning for. We're past the point where we can undo it, so we need to start actually creating plans to resiliently come back once these climate disasters happen. And that is one of our main principles, is like, it's gonna happen, we have to start planning for it. Next slide. And then addressing health and well-being. There is no way to have a sustainable community that is unhealthy. You cannot talk about having a green neighborhood without having a neighborhood where people feel safe in it, where people have access to healthy foods, where people have access to healthy spaces to enter, where they don't feel like they're going to be targeted by the police. Like, you need to have neighborhoods that genuinely provide access to the people who live there and to recreate and to enjoy their lives. It's not enough to just exist, but you have to be able to thrive in the space that you're in. And that's part of living in a healthy, sustainable space. Next slide. This is my personal favorite of our principles. I think designing with nature is the most important thing we can do, because for as long as we've been developing spaces, we have thought that we are above nature and that we as humans get to dictate how the natural processes go. But in reality, we are of this earth, and we are supposed to live within the natural systems that already exist. And so we can't undo everything we've already done. We have already created landscapes that sort of not only colonize the people, but also colonize the planet. And so we need to now try and mitigate that damage and work within the natural systems in the ways that are more equitable than the ways that we've done it in the past. And finally, this kind of goes back to what I was saying before, creating ways to measure your impact. It's incredible to set out plans for 2050, but if you're not checking in every once in a while to make sure you're on those paths to 2050, then it's just making a claim, and there's no actual way to hold yourself accountable. And so that's like one of our core things, is accountability and making sure that the performance is actually there and that you aren't just attempting to do something, you're actually doing it. So now we get to go into what our actual programs are. We have 3 main ways that you can get involved with EcoDistricts. We have our accredited professional program, our certification network, and our AP studio, our EcoDistrict studio. So you can go to the next slide. Our AP network has expanded tremendously this year. It's been really incredible to see. We went from roughly 200 people at the beginning of 2020 to now over 600. Thanks to some money from Kresge, we were able to make our online training free. So we were able to really expand our network. And our accredited professionals are people who are on the ground doing the work every day. They are community organizers, they are architects, they are urban planners, they are all of the people that play a role in this, and they are able to take this protocol and our framework and apply it to the work that they do. We're in 28 countries, which is pretty exciting. We were able to really expand. And so we're hoping to see some genuine impacts from it. You can go to the next slide. Currently have roughly 20 certification projects that are all based right now in North America. There's actually one in San Diego in Pacific Beach, and they are formally like seeking certification. But you can go to the next slide. There's quite a diversity of the kinds of neighborhoods that seek certification. We have publicly led, we have community led, privately led. Sometimes it is a developer that has a brownfield site that wants to redevelop, but wants to do it in a way that actually is inclusive. Sometimes it's a business district that has been going for years, but wants to actually start doing community programming. And the way that they go about that is by doing certifying as an eco-district and actually using that to leverage getting funding so that they can do the community programming and get grants. And then there's also, like my personal favorite are the community-led neighborhoods that recognize that they are at risk of gentrification or have already started gentrifying, and they want to reclaim the ownership of their neighborhood. So they create a governance structure so that they can fight back and work with the powers of the developers. And then finally, our final program is our EcoDistrict Studio, which is, you can switch, a network of roughly 10 professionals across a bunch of different fields, from affordable housing to urban planning to advocacy, that all have been in this for a while. We have incredible individuals with a very diverse range of skills that have all worked with us to help form our protocol and help inform the work that we do. And so you can hire some, all, whatever number of them to come in and actually like help consult, whether it's a university that wants to do trainings with their students or wants to work on their campus plan. All of it is kind of available, and we have experts that you can bring in to sort of plug in the different spaces and work as consultants. And this is a newer program. We used to do a lot more in-person things, but because we are now in a virtual age, we're trying to figure out ways to still help inform, but not necessarily convene in person. So our final slide is, if you are interested in learning more, you can always email me. My email is teva@EcoDistricts. And then you can follow us on all of our social medias. We have been really lucky that because we've expanded our network, we're getting to share a lot more stories from people on the ground who are actually doing the work. And it's been really exciting to get to sort of facilitate that. But yeah, that's EcoDistricts. Thank you so much for listening.
Great, thank you, Teva. I think, we were really excited to have EcoDistricts because it has a local presence. We have APs here in San Diego doing this work, and I think, all three of the panelists today are coming at this with the approach of community scale work, and we can't just think about a singular building and then that's going to solve our issues. We need to think community scale. So I was really excited to hear more about EcoDistricts, which the community is everything to you guys. So it's really great to hear more about. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass over to our next speaker, Rose from IWBI.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. And two very tough acts to follow, but so powerful and such aligned work. So I feel privileged to round out the presentations today. So I'm going to talk today about how the Well Building Standard offers strategies to promote health and equity in the built environment. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview of our work, and then I'll dive into some of our specific strategies, especially in the context of the current pandemic. So starting with a bit of the research background, since that's where our work starts. So according to research conducted by the WHO and the CDC, the majority of what determines our individual and collective health is actually our physical and social environments. So that includes both the built environment, like how our home or office or community is designed, as well as social factors like our income, our race, our ethnicity, and our age, and combined with our behaviors. So how active we are, whether we smoke, what we eat each day. Next slide. And so if you combine that with the fact that we spend about 90% of our time indoors, we find that the spaces where we live, work, play, interact, sleep, play a profound role in influencing our health and well-being. And I think we've all experienced this in the spaces where we work or go to school. Maybe you're in an office that's freezing all the time with terrible ventilation, or maybe no windows, no access to natural light. Maybe there's one vending machine that has really unhealthy snacks. And we actually feel how that impacts our productivity, our mental health, even our sleep patterns. And I think a great example of that is the recent experience being quarantined in our homes or other spaces where we're not technically necessarily set up for productivity and working, even though we're being forced to work remotely. So maybe if you're stuck in a small apartment like I am here in New York City, you don't necessarily have the space to do your daily workout, or maybe you're not getting access to that green space or that natural light that you typically would in your commute to work or commute to school. And we're all feeling very socially isolated from the people that we typically interact with each day. So whatever it is, we're all feeling in one way or another how our spaces, where we're now spending even more of our time, are influencing our health and well-being. Next slide. So this idea is the foundation of the Well Building Standard, which combines public health and scientific research with industry best practices to create performance-focused, third-party verified building design policies and operations strategies that really truly promote human health and well-being actively. Next slide. And when we talk about advancing health, we're not just talking about physical health. So we're using the WHO definition, which includes physical, mental, and social well-being as part of health. So WELL takes this holistic approach that aims to address each of those pillars by bridging building design and operations with what we know about human behavior to really support the whole person. And so what that means is that WELL is essentially a human-centered standard because our mission is to help all people thrive through healthier spaces, organizations, and communities. And we really believe that every person is entitled to an environment that enables them to be as healthy as possible. And the way we approach our mission is utilizing this framework of the 10 concepts or pillars of WELL, each of which has its own unique features that promote positive health outcomes by uniting design and operation strategies that can be done at the building or community scale with policy strategies that can be done at an organizational or even community scale to impact across those 3 types of health and well-being. So the 10 concepts have been constant across the various evolutions of WELL. We first launched WELL version 1, the WELL Building Standard, in 2014, and that evolved to version 2 pilot in 2018, which recently graduated out of pilot to be fully fledged WELL v2 this September. We also have a neighborhood scale product called the WELL Community Standard that thinks about how our shared and public spaces influence our health. And we have a WELL portfolio program that allows companies to scale health strategies across a collection of buildings or at the organizational scale. So all of these various evolutions of WELL have involved a co-creation process of incorporating significant feedback from our projects over the years, from concept and sector specific advisories of external experts and other partners in the WELL community to ensure that we have a standard that's really comprehensive and inclusive and adaptable worldwide. And globally right now, WELL has over 4,800 projects across space types in 64 countries, encompassing just over 670 million square feet. And we also have an amazing global community of over 12,000 WELL APs across over 90 countries and 220 WELL faculty. And they are our incredible agents of change in promoting health and equity in the built environment. So to us, this really represents this growing global movement in recognition of the role that physical spaces play in our health. And it also, for us as a standard development team internally, means that we really need to think about inclusion from the perspective of cultivating strategies that equitably support health outcomes for people across all of these different space types. So we are in commercial offices and schools and retail, industrial spaces, hotels, entertainment venues, hospitals, other types of spaces as well. And also thinking about impacting health outcomes worldwide across all of these different regions. But throughout what we do and throughout all of these different variations of WELL, equity has been really foundational. So one of, and actually the first of our 6 core principles of WELL as a human-centered standard really needs to be supporting the health and well-being of all individuals, no matter their identity, background, location, or level of ability. And because WELL is a health-centered standard, we focus on health equity. So you can go to the next slide. And we use the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation definition of health equity, which states that health equity means everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible. So we use that definition because it recognizes, as Kelly and Teva touched on, that public health really is an equity issue. And that's been highlighted this year even more as COVID-19 has really put a spotlight on the vast and pre-existing systemic inequities that have put Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities most at risk of getting sick and dying from COVID. And we know that these disparities in the pandemic's impact stem from racial health disparities that are related to underlying chronic illnesses. So the CDC released a study earlier this year that found about 90% of the most serious COVID cases actually involve underlying health conditions like hypertension, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, and chronic lung disease that are more common and more deadly in Black communities. And it's also tied to the environmental injustice because Black and Brown communities bear the brunt of exposure to air pollution, which can lead to respiratory conditions that also then contribute to higher risk of mortality from COVID. And those same, again, disparities exist around lack of access to health information and healthcare. So WELL really seeks to remove these kinds of obstacles to health and address the powerlessness that these communities can feel in the planning process by engaging and empowering these diverse stakeholders to identify their health needs, and then promoting strategies that transform the built environment from those that can actually create or even reinforce inequities, as Teva touched on, or negatively impact health for certain individuals, into safe environments that actually meet everyone's needs and reduce barriers to health information, reduce barriers to health care, and ultimately provide that fair opportunity for everyone to be as healthy as possible. So you can go to the next slide. When we started to hear warnings from our Asian colleagues in China about the pandemic earlier this year, we actually paused our normal operations, and we really tried to re-examine what we could do to help communities respond to COVID-19. So we stood up a global open task force on COVID, which ultimately included over 600 stakeholders across different industries and different regions, representing diverse communities, and they provided their feedback on the kinds of tools that they needed to help them respond and recover from COVID-19. So their goals were to inform new guidelines for prevention and preparedness, resilience and recovery from COVID, and to inform actual changes to the WELL building standard. And the guidelines and the additions to WELL that we created based on the task force's feedback ultimately led to an actual new product that we recently launched specifically to support response to COVID-19, and it's called the WELL Health Safety Rating. So you can go to the next slide. And the WELL Health Safety Rating offers a set of scalable, evidence-based policy planning and operation strategies, and they are intended to help instill confidence for buildings and communities to start reopening safely. So it encompasses a number of evidence-based building operational policies like cleaning procedures, reducing contact, providing equal access to necessary healthcare benefits, and facilities management and maintenance protocols like increased ventilation and water quality management, alongside emergency planning strategies and even stakeholder education and engagement to make sure that every occupant's needs and concerns are heard and addressed as part of that re-entry and response process. And we have seen adoption already across a number of sectors around the world because a lot of building owners and corporations and a number of our partners are really looking for this kind of guidance. And while this WELL Health Safety Rating was designed to help support response to COVID, it's also an entry point for a lot of these organizations and buildings and communities that want to address these longer term health issues at scale. And that's really what WELL version 2 is about. So I'm going to dive into a few of the WELL V2 strategies across different concepts that seek to address some of those underlying social determinants of health and the inequities that we typically find in the built environment. So just as an example, starting with our water concept, first and foremost, providing access to safe, quality drinking water, which is so fundamental to health. But as we saw in the video that Kelly mentioned, it's not always accessible for all communities. And another example in the water features sort of on a different almost approach to equity is the hygiene support feature that requires that bathrooms meet accessible design standards and also include gender neutral bathroom signage. So ensuring that everybody, no matter their ability or their gender identity, feel like their needs are met in the design process and that they can safely access facilities. Another example in our nourishment concept promotes access to fruits and vegetables for all occupants, and that might be on-site or through walkability or transportation to a local farmer's market. Again, that might seem obvious for health, but it's not always a given for every community, and it can also help lower rates of chronic disease, obviously. In our movement concept, we support ergonomic workstation design. So I think we're all feeling that again right now as we're trying to work from home, adapting our workstation to the physical needs of each individual. We also promote equitable access to physical activity programming for everyone, including those who are working remotely or have different physical needs or abilities, and encourage projects to select sites that are walkable or near mass transit to enable an affordable and physically active commute for everybody. And then finally, in our mind concept, we promote equitable access to indoor and outdoor nature. We provide access to services that support cognitive and emotional health. And we also encourage substance abuse and addiction services. And all of these mental health and substance abuse services are particularly important right now because we've seen increased rates of depression and stress and substance abuse during the pandemic. And then finally, just to share a few of the strategies I oversee in the community concept, this is the concept that really centers most on promoting health equity. And first, with similar themes to what Teva spoke to earlier, community encourages an inclusive planning process. So we promote stakeholder charrettes that include not just architects and engineers, but also members of the wider community. We also require the use of surveys to gather ongoing occupant feedback. We also include a number of policies that specifically support new parents, new mothers, other types of caregivers who have been really hard hit by the pandemic, but also in any circumstance bear the burden of really balancing caregiving with work. And so providing supportive policies like parental or family leave, or resources like childcare support in lactation rooms or flexible working hours can make a huge difference for their mental and emotional health and well-being. We also promote equal access, so both literally through universal and accessible design, ensuring that all individuals can fully access and utilize the space, and also in terms of reducing barriers to health services, healthcare, and health education. And we actually have an overlap with JUST. We promote and reward organizations that have pursued JUST and that take those steps to really establish comprehensive DEI policies and disclose the work that they're doing to support equitable access to opportunity for every population. And then finally, we also have strategies encouraging projects to address health equity issues in the wider community. So charitable engagement, but also the allocation of healthy, affordable housing units, or even taking steps to identify and address modern slavery practices in the supply chain. So all of these strategies, I know that was a lot of information, it's very dense, but all of these are really moving toward the same intent, right? Which is to enable all individuals to really participate, access, and thrive within the systems of their community, and to therefore have, going back to that earlier definition, that fair opportunity to be as healthy as possible. And so I'll just mention, finally, we also are really excited about establishing partnerships to move the needle on health equity. And so we recently announced a partnership with Enterprise Community Partners. This year, they launched their Enterprise 2020 Green Communities criteria. And starting this year, any project that certifies under their new criteria will also become WELL certified. So we were able to work with them to integrate WELL v2 features into their new criteria. And we're really excited because this is going to drive the development of affordable housing that prioritizes health. And we know that these communities are disproportionately impacted by health burdens, by environmental injustices. And so it's really an opportunity to bring healthy design and make it affordable for those communities that can benefit from it the most, and to target those health concerns that we know are known issues in those kinds of communities, like asthma and stress-related mental health issues and others. So I'll just wrap up by saying on our final slide, I hope that you'll engage with us, whether through any of the programs I mentioned, or we also have our WELL AP, our WELL faculty, and our IWBI membership program, and happy to answer any questions during our Q&A. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Rose. I'm actually gonna stop sharing the screen for a second so we can open up to panel and everyone can take a look at our panelists while we go through some questions. Again, thank you all for three very different approaches, but also there's a lot of lying similarities because we're doing similar work. We have similar goals. The sustainability community, like in general, there are many different ways that we can go about some of the work, but we have very underlying goals that are similar. So it's nice to hear you know, some different paths, avenues, and ultimately these are three organizations that offer tools, pathways to start having these conversations and addressing equity and climate change and health issues within your built environment. So it's just really great to hear the different perspectives. Thank you, everyone. So with that, I'll go ahead. I've got my handy dandy questions here that I'll start off with. In the audience, please feel free to drop some questions into the chat or Q&A as we go through. So the first question I have is, you know, all three of your organizations are thinking about sustainability and equity with an intersectional lens, but what are some ways that your organization specifically keeps intersectionality in mind, and maybe some ways, some conversations that you've even had in your own teams or programs about keeping intersectionality at the forefront of sustainability and equity. So I'll go ahead and just pass it in the order that we spoke. If Kelly, if you want to share an answer first, if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, something that we run into a lot, right? Like, we want to make sure that we are valuing cultural complexities, and so that's why we kind of take like a step back approach and think, all right, so we have a concept of diversity here in America. We often link it to racial diversity, but like, let's look elsewhere. Let's look around the world. And we've been partnering with multiple organizations and working with one organization in Japan, which has been amazing, because just learning about the different cultural values in Japan versus the US is just so great. And I just feel like we should be kind of broadening our thought process and understanding other definitions of things that we might say, like, oh, DEI, that's something we all know, but it's different. So, diversity there is more like religious diversity, as well as like origin or different like ethnic groups within the area or cultures. So it can definitely just expand. So I say we work with other organizations, and it's kind of a long-winded answer, I'm sorry. But we work with organizations to ask them, what do you think would be best in this situation, and from your experience, and try to integrate that into our standards and our metrics moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. Teva?
That was awesome. Yeah, I would say kind of similarly, we have been like very intentional about trying to create partnerships to make our training accessible and free to specifically like BIPOC leaders. I've been working with the NAACP's environmental justice program to like try and create a pathway to make sure that leaders that are part of their community can access our funding and our programming for free. And I also I feel like we have not the biggest network, but we do have a network of professionals, and we have a pretty wide audience on our campaigns and in like our subscriptions. And so we try to make sure that we bring diverse perspectives to all of our programming and to our webinar series and stuff like that, so that people have access for free to this material that can help educate and bring a different perspective than they necessarily hear in the mainstream planning process.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think it's great that these are 3 organizations also that have that global perspective. So Rose, if you'd like to answer as well.
Sure. Yes, very similar themes for sure. I would just also mention our CEO, Rick Fedrizzi, also always likes to refer to our work as the second wave of sustainability, thinking about these intersections between people and planet, and thinking about human sustainability very much hand in hand with environmental sustainability. And so the way that he puts it, the first wave was focused on minimizing the impact of the built environment on ecosystems. And now the second wave is thinking about actually our built spaces can really actively promote health and equity and sustainability in so many ways. And so we've really tried to step back and look at which of our well strategies can actively promote both human and environmental health alongside equity. And you see those intersections in a number of the formal pathways that we've established. We have these formal programs called crosswalks that aim to highlight the overlaps between environmental sustainability programs like LEAD and others and WELL, and to sort of help projects that are looking to pursue both these, or I guess these sort of 3 tied together strategies and goals of health and sustainability and equity, and to sort of help accelerate and streamline that process. And we, as I mentioned earlier, also really want to recognize the work that organizations and projects and communities are doing in all of these other areas. And so, we offer incentives and points for pursuing LEAD and Green Star and ILFI Petal certification and JUST and all these other programs that we see as very much aligned with the work that we do. But also similarly to, as Teva and Kelly mentioned, we really have to think about, okay, as one sort of universal building standard, what does health and equity mean across all of these space types and all of these different regions? How can one standard serve the needs of all of these people, of all of these spaces, all these communities? And so we like to think that partnership is the new leadership. And so we definitely try to do as much as we can to work with other organizations to set up our advisories and our task force and other channels of engagement with as many communities as possible to really keep informing the evolution of what we do and to really identify those deltas that need to be filled between human health strategies, environmental sustainability strategies, and of course, equity being that underlying theme and health equity being that ultimate goal.
That's great. So that actually kind of connects a little bit to another question that I had, kind of just thinking while the three of you were going through your presentations, a common theme between the three is community and having those conversations with local community members and staying engaged with what's happening locally. So I was just wondering if the three of you could share a little bit about how your organizations or maybe even your department personally have connected with local community leaders that are doing this work and how you've really fostered that community relationship between organization and where you're located. So if Kelly, if you want to share.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm going to start off saying I think that we have a long way to go. I think that we can always be better. And that's something that we think about at ILFI. We're very self-critical. So we're like, the one question we ask all the time is this what good looks like? And what does good look like? And so building off of that, wait, what was the question?
How you're engaging with community members.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So through LCC, the Living Community Challenge, that is definitely a big program in which we foster community engagement between multiple different facets of community. So it could be local community, government, grassroots operations, etc. So I would say that is one of our large programs that engages as well as fosters that community connection. I would also say, hopefully in the works, but we really want to start, just listening, sitting down, having forums where other people, we ask, would you like to share your experience and let us listen to know, how can we make our affordable housing program more suitable? What are we missing? What are our blind spots? Definitely asking those critical questions to any local community members really helps us in our work.
Yeah, absolutely. Teva?
That was a great response. And I would say very similarly, we also are very self-critical about the work that we do. And we often we work a lot in very diverse communities, but we also want to always recognize that we're not always a member of the community that we enter. And that's important to not go in thinking that we're the experts on a community that we're not a part of. They are the experts. We are there to listen and help facilitate. And we have been in the past done a lot of in-person incubators, which are like 3-day charrette style workshops where project teams come to Portland and we do a bunch of really incredible workshops, and there's speakers and there's different design projects. And we have now just gotten done with a slew of virtual incubators, which were very, very different. It's hard to do 2-day, 3-hour workshops with people virtually. They are not the most fun, but we did do them, and it was beautiful to see the way that we were able to still convene and create community, even though it wasn't necessarily sharing space with each other. We were able to share virtual space, and that was really incredible. But always going into it recognizing that we maybe are experts in our EcoDistricts philosophy, but we are not experts on the community that we are entering. That's, I think, the key to our work, is recognizing that there's a boundary between where we are and where they are, and they are the experts.
Yeah, That's really a great point to bring up and remember. And while not everyone on the call might be in the built environment sphere, and we are the Green Building Council, and it's important to remember that the nature of our work is sometimes invasive. And so to have those conversations and making sure that we're connecting is absolutely a really important step. Rose, if you'd like to share any additional thoughts.
Sure, no, such great points made already. And I would just reinforce that for us, it's always a co-creation process. And so we're constantly, again, just similar to my other panelists, trying to rethink our channels of engagement and how we can lower barriers to entry for hearing more diverse voices from more communities in all of the areas where we're reaching around the world. And so we've convened roundtables in our various markets in Australia and China and UK and East Coast and the West Coast. And we're trying to do even more of that, obviously, in our virtual world. We're doing a bit of the virtual roundtables now, but a lot of listening. And I mentioned earlier, we also have our advisories. We've been really growing the advisories platform, and we've been targeting our advisories toward not just specific concepts, but different regions and different sectors as well expands. And again, sort of envisioning our advisory recruitment process. So really wanting to make sure that we're reaching everyone and everybody feels they have an opportunity to participate. And we've also been sort of moving more into the space of working with city leaders increasingly, especially this year with COVID-19. So the US Conference of Mayors actually recently passed a resolution that promotes and encourages cities to think more holistically and more specifically from a sort of performance-based perspective around healthy buildings and how health and equity and sustainability all really need to be considered together, especially in response to COVID-19, but also in the longer term. So we're really trying to step back and think about how we can provide support to city leaders and from the civic engagement side as well. We're releasing some guidelines to help poll workers stay safe as they're volunteering. And so we're just trying to rethink both in terms of our partnerships and the voices that we're bringing into the community, but also those points of engagement that we can provide back and contribute back to the local communities where we are.
Yeah, it's really great work. Like I'm just so excited with the quality and the really amazing panelists that we've been able to pull together. It's really great to hear from you guys. And I think I think Rose just mentioned in one of her answers and really touched on it in the presentation as well, but I wanted to give an opportunity maybe to Kelly and Teva to share a little bit about, we've talked about how the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities. And, while health and wellness is at the very forefront of the Well Building Institute, it's something that's also ingrained in ILFI and EcoDistricts missions. And so I wanted to give an opportunity to the two of you, and then Rose, if you'd like to add anything additional as well, to talk about how your organization has addressed some of those health inequities and like how are those conversations going since the COVID-19 pandemic. So whoever wants to go first.
I can go. Yeah, in terms of COVID, so it's crazy. We have a lot of these discussions internally as well as externally. So I would say, first of all, internally, just talking from like a productivity level, realizing this isn't something that we've experienced and it's new territory. There's a lot of healing and additionally with COVID, right, there's social unrest, there's political unrest, there's a lot of kind of internal healing and things that we all have to go through on a personal level. So I feel like we do talk about that a lot, in terms of if a project team is really struggling, like how can we help them? How can we change our standards, but as well as, keep up that really high bar and, creating or gathering that green product to, make a new building. But, it's hard because in our industry, a lot of things shut down and it's just interesting. Like we're just coming into questions we never thought of. And so we've definitely have a formal process where people can go and, kind of pitch to us what they think would be the best process to integrate into our organization. It's definitely been interesting and difficult, and in terms of physical health, and in Just we capitalize on physical health, and we also partner with Well. And so anything, we're like, well, what, coming up with creative ideas to be physical in a virtual space as well. Having like a 15-minute break where everyone goes on a walk together, on a virtual walk, or goes outside for a meeting, takes breaths. It's definitely cohesive, I would say, ongoing, but those are some things that we've done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly not over. So we're going to continue learning and not fully understand how and to react in future. God forbid it happens again anytime soon. But yeah, Teva.
Yeah, so I would definitely echo a lot of the points Callie just made. And we are a very small team at EcoDistricts. It's just a couple of us. And so very much recognizing that this is a really human event. Like we are all people, and like there's a lot of stuff going on right now that isn't necessarily easy to process in the moment, and like it's hard to continue working, I think, is something that we've really been trying to recognize in each other, and recognize that this is the first time we're having to deal with being home with our kids all day and stuff like it's trying to teach your kids at home, like there's a lot of new factors that come into play. And so just like really giving people grace to like make mistakes, because this is uncharted territory that we haven't necessarily been in before. And then with our actual work, it has just really shown to me that like digital inequity is such a bigger problem than I ever realized. And that comes from a tremendous seat of privilege. And like, I never really had that in my mind of like, when we're doing engagement, that digital inequity is something that we need to be bringing up, and that there are definite communities that we work with that don't have the access to living a virtual world. Like there isn't the way, they don't have the same accessibility to have virtual meetings all day. They especially if there are children in school or multiple kids in classes, like these are problems that we haven't planned for, and it wasn't something that we were talking about when we were talking about resilience in our planning. But now that as we see 2020, we recognize that in the future, like that is part of a conversation about resilience, is like, how good of a Wi-Fi connection do communities have? Like, do they have access to like multiple computers in their home? Stuff like that. Like that has really been brought to my attention and our attention in a way that we weren't expecting, but it's good to know. And there aren't really solutions that we've come up with yet, but
Yeah.
as we navigate this, hopefully there are better ways.
Yeah, that's great. Rose, if you want to share anything, or if you want, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I already sort of obviously touched on the external work that we've been doing, but I think internally that point about empathy is so critically important. I mean, internally and externally in everything we do, but I think from the point of our sort of internal priorities and how they've shifted, there's been so much of an emphasis really on bringing the work that we do with Well into our personal lives and how we interact with each other on a personal and professional basis. And so really taking a look at how can we provide the resources to employees that they need during this time in particular, which has been compounded by all of the different factors that we're all experiencing. And then with so much of an increase in work for us as well, just as we've been starting to sort of create new products like the Well Health Safety Rating and all the sort of external work that I mentioned earlier, but really allocating those resources to really practice what we preach, especially right now. So providing resources for people who are working from home to have more of an ergonomic or physically healthy work setup, or providing flexible work opportunities for parents who are trying to balance working from home and taking care of their kids who are not going to school right now, or taking walking meetings, or starting our meetings with a mindful minute, which is my new favorite practice. So just like taking a minute or two to reset and then to sort of focus in on your next meeting, especially a day that's filled with Zoom. And just those small changes that can actually make a huge difference for our mental well-being, our physical and our emotional well-being during this time. And then from just the sort of point that you were raising your earlier question around addressing these questions and these challenges around inequities, we've also been having a lot of internal dialogue and taking a step back and saying, you know, how can we rethink what we're doing internally as an organization, which is so critically important to be able to really inform the work that we're doing externally to promote health equity. You know, the first important point is really to think about how can we reevaluate our own internal policies and practices. We're reevaluating our hiring practices. We've set up a new working group called Let's Do Better to welcome any staff that wants to participate and share their feedback on how they think the organization can really do more work to address DEI goals. And so trying to have and support those internal dialogues as well has really been a significant shift this year.
That's great. Thank you. So we're closing into the last few minutes of our session. So I just want to really close out today with a little bit more of like a next steps, a little bit more of an inspirational for the people that are on the call. But I wanted to ask our panelists, you know, what are some overall goals and progress that you hope to see come out of our industry? You know, this work is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen within 1, 2, 3 years. It's long-term goals. But I just wanted to see, like, what are you hoping or what are you thinking we're going to see coming out of the current state of the world? Kelly, if you want to maybe start.
Yeah, of course. One big thing is I definitely want to see a lot more affordable green housing. You know, especially in terms of COVID, this is a scary time for many people, and especially having a place to call home and come to in times where maybe going outside isn't as safe as you would like it to be. You know, that's something that's huge for me. Another thing would definitely be seeing all identities represented in multiple facets of work. So especially in just, that's a huge goal for me. You know, any identities that might go unseen that maybe were a blind spot for us, like I want that to be elevated and just really focus on inclusion. Like there's this, you know, notion and stereotype that sustainability and green building is only for like the rich 1% person that wants, you know, 5 off the grid beach homes. Sorry, I watched that on HGTV. That was my connection. And it's just not true. We really have to break down that stereotype, as well as, you know, understand, yeah, in terms of green building, it can be like sort of a fad and then push through the roof in terms of money. We need to make it more of a necessity, something that everyone can have, and not look as, oh, aspirational. One day I could you know, have a green office, or one day I could have a green home. Like, that's unacceptable. We have to take accountability and responsibility to make sure that this is reached by all communities.
That's great. Thank you. Teva?
I would very much echo what Kelly just said. I think especially being in Portland, which is a space right now that has had a lot of different issues come up, and we have been in the news for a lot of different things. I think that making genuine changes to the way our budgets work, the way that where we put our money shows what our priorities are. And I think that this year has shown us that we have our money in the wrong spots sometimes, a lot of the time, and we need to actually prioritize community well-being over some of the less effective ways of taking care of our communities. And I think it also has shown, like, we have to stop talking about things in theory. I know myself, I'm in a lot of meetings where we talk about talking about things in the future, and we plan to plan another thing. And I think that this year has shown us that we need to just start doing the things that we want to do and stop talking about doing the things that need to be done. And so I'm hoping that as we enter a post-COVID age, we get to start actually making the changes that we've been coming up with in our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Teva. Rose?
As always, such powerful points made by my fellow panelists, and absolutely want to echo what they've already mentioned. And I think to Kelly's earlier point, we certainly don't want it to be healthy for the wealthy. That's sort of what we use as our guiding star, is really thinking about, no, it's not meant to be, oh, it's only like Fortune 500 companies that have access to these healthy, sustainable office spaces. No, it's really meant to be accessible and available to everyone. So I'm hoping that we'll see a movement more toward availability and accessibility of affordable and healthy and sustainable spaces, not just offices, not just fancy spaces, but homes and schools and living areas and communities. And I'm also hoping that actually some of the changes that have resulted as a more immediate response to COVID-19 will actually stick. I think we've seen some more inclusive practices. We've seen that roads have been closed to traffic and more public and green space has been made available to pedestrians. We've seen more resources allocated toward populations, as Teva and Kelly both mentioned, that may not typically get the resources they need or deserve, but now more attention is being brought to the diverse needs of various populations and individuals who are working in different places or juggling different priorities and have different needs. And so I'm hoping that focus will continue, that it won't just be a phase in the immediate response to COVID-19, but those strategies will actually be proven to have an ROI, to have benefits to productivity and environmental health. But ultimately, I hope that we're no longer talking about the green building industry or the healthy building industry, that it's just the building industry. I'm really hoping that we'll just sort of be able to break down all of those real or perceived silos across equity, sustainability, and health, and we'll recognize that those strategies really do need to and really can go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna just pop up some more information where people can get involved, but I want to say thank you again, and also, to echo, I feel like all of you would agree, but I certainly feel like I know that progress hasn't been made, and like my ultimate goal is that you don't need my job. I shouldn't have to teach sustainability and green building. This should be at the core of what we do, and it should be our first priority. I would very much like for nonprofits to not have to exist. It's the nonprofit industry, corporate industry governance. It's rooted in inaccessibility, and so I think that these are things. While we have these conversations and we operate in the spaces that we operate in, it's important to kind of just be critical of the spaces that we occupy and then the industries that we respectively work in as we continue these conversations. And so I'm really happy to hear the perspectives of all three of you. And I just really appreciate you joining today's panel. And then I just want to say thanks again for all the attendees. If you joined for 1, 2, all 3 sessions, we really, really appreciate it. This has been, an ongoing conversation in our organization, and we wanted to outwardly make some of the education that we've been going through accessible to our community members so that we can start these conversations. We as an organization will be the first to tell you, as well as these 3 panelists mentioned, we are not perfect. We have a long way to go. And so, we very much are interested in just keeping these conversations going and then turning the conversations into action. So we're an education organization. We do education all day long. And so it's important to be able to also think about how we can take the education we're delivering and put it into practice. So that was, the goal of today, is to start thinking about what's going on, who's doing this work, how can we join them, how can we start up something new, and just really think about equity and sustainability and the green building environment in a more intersectional way. So I just thank everyone for joining us today. The recordings will be available on our website afterwards. You can follow us on social media, get involved with all the organizations that spoke today, doing amazing work. And so thanks for sticking around for a few minutes after. And then again, thank you so much to our panelists, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of their afternoon or evening. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.